Hey everyone, it's Strange Michael. I hope you're doing well today. I have a review for a movie that I love deeply because of my childhood fears of it and because of things I've enjoyed about this movie forever since I saw it back on the Sci-Fi Channel way back in the day. There used to be a horror movie marathon, new release, 2 movies a week type of thing with movie theaters back in the day called the After Dark Horror Fest. And if you've heard of this, you might have seen, if you were as old as me, about 28 or so years old, you've probably seen some of this if you were a big fan of Sci-Fi Channel maybe 15, almost 20 years ago. They used to play pretty much movies that came out every single year from the After Dark Horror Fest in the cinemas, and then when they were over, I think it was the following year they'd start showing it on TV, so I probably didn't see this movie until roughly 2007, even though it's a 2006 release. This film was one of the films in that first original After Dark Horror Fest. I've owned this DVD for ages, and it's a great example of a movie that I never hear people talk about almost ever, and it's so underrated. It has its flaws, yes, and I'll get into that as the review goes along, but I love this movie deeply. It is called The Gravedancers. It might look, from the cover, even though I like the cover, I think a lot of people might think this is possibly, if you just pass it on Tubi or Amazon Prime, you might think it just is some generic haunted house, ghost possession haunting movie. To some extent, you get a little bit of that right. Just a little bit. Maybe about 10% of it right? I really love this, and it stuck with me for a reason. I really hoped this time around, even though I meant to watch this last fall, I wanted to review it for the channel, just could not carve out the time because the new Halloween Kills movie was coming out. I wanted to watch so much other stuff. I watched it just now, today, and it still holds up. It's still creepy. It's still scary to me. Again, it has its flaws, things I never realized when I was a kid, but I still love it deeply. It's the only one of 2 of the Dark or After Dark Horror Fest films that I actually own on DVD. The other one being probably in my top 5 slashers of all time when it comes to standalone movies more so than anything, but it's still a great one. Dark Ride. Dark Ride is phenomenal. By the way, After Dark Horror Fest, I think in the original series too, was also the series that put out Lake Mungo, which is very well known amongst the found footage fans like myself. Lake Mungo is a fantastic movie. I highly recommend that too. Gravedancers is not a found footage movie though. It has a small element of different other subgenres in horror throughout it, especially towards the finale of it. It only has like one actor I know. I'll get to that in a little bit. But essentially the plot of The Gravedancers is basically what the title says. Essentially a group of friends, and one of the guy who is pretty much our main character, he and his wife are involved in this situation too, but mainly there are 3 best friends who had a 4th best friend who just passed away. And essentially they're out in the cemetery very late at night without the one guy's wife. And they're drunk, they're joking around, laughing and stuff, cackling in the woods and whatever. And while they're out of the cemetery, they decide to go party down and start dancing amongst the graves. And they each dance upon the grave of a certain dead person for each of them. And they all, for some reason, get a curse put on them because that same night they happen to read a poem that was left at their friend's gravesite from earlier that day when they had the funeral. And when they read this poem, it's very eerie, very urban legend-esque, if you love that kind of thing, like urban legends, myths, those kinds of things, classical ghost stories. If you like that kind of thing, The Gravedancers is going to be right up your alley, even with its minor flaws throughout. I think it's extremely scary. Like I said, it's not like a James Wan kind of filmmaking aspect, but at the time in 2006 we didn't really have many movies that were different from this. This has elements of, again, of found footage, of slasher stuff. There's a little bit of difference depending on what part of the movie we're talking about. For an hour-and-a-half long movie from 2006 and fairly low budget on top of that, it's surprisingly good. It's really good and it holds up really well for the most part. The ending has an aspect here or there that I have my complaints with. It kind of harmed the movie a little bit. But overall, if you like kind of unique urban legend ghost movies, if you like that. I'm not a big ghost movie fan because most possession movies and stuff are the exact same thing over and over again. As you guys know from my channel, if you've watched me long enough, I'm not a fan of that. It gets old really quick. To me, I would rather watch slashers over and over again because at least you get different practical effects and that kind of thing, but ghost movies, you don't even get that most of the time. This, to me, with the concept and everything else, is pretty much the most unique of the very few unique ghost stories I've ever seen put to film. And it's stuck with me all of my life. I've owned this movie since it came out on DVD and since I saw it on Sci-Fi Channel. I fell in love with it. I've always really, really liked it, as I said. Now, when we get on to the characters, I don't really have too many of the characters to really talk about. They're all just kind of your typical jokey friend group, and that's really cool. The wife of the main guy, who I've seen in Arrow and Flash, this guy actor, you've seen him too if you're a fan of those shows. His wife in this film looks very familiar to me. I can't really pinpoint where I know her from, but she has kind of a tension with the girl that's one of the friends in that friend group, because she thinks there's some chemistry between her husband and this particular girl who's his best friend. And that kind of adds a nice little layer of tension throughout the movie, especially in the finale of the movie. There's some eerie stuff going on there. Again, for it being creepy, I think it really, really resonates with me even now. There are stuff that I remembered from this movie, from my childhood. Back when this came out, when I would have seen it about 2007, I would have been about 12 or 13. This is really when my love for horror started blossoming even more. My mom started letting me watch a lot more horror movies at that time. I saw Nightmare on Elm Street around the time I saw this, and the rest of its series. I saw Freddy vs. Jason around this time. I saw the Chucky films after I finally grew up enough to really not be as scared of killer dolls as I used to be because of Slappy from Goosebumps. It really was a time of finding new things for me, for movies that I really fell in love with. And this was down the tunnel of horror movies that I just absolutely loved, and it really opened up the world of horror for me. Just wanted to make sure that I gave some praise to this film and really brought that in, even though my reviews have been a little lengthy recently, because I think it's worth mentioning, because I appreciate this movie so much for what it is. But the writing and the acting itself, there's some jokes here and there that work. I like that. It adds a little levity to the really dark concept of this movie about dancing on a dead person's grave and then kind of being haunted and cursed by that person. It kind of goes in another route too of like a ghost hunting type of thing, kind of a possession exorcism movie, but not really with a straight up exorcism in there. It's a unique take on that I don't really see anywhere. It kind of feels like a Poltergeist movie just a little bit, but more like a Poltergeist 2 or 3 where it's a little bit more mature, not really for kids. That's kind of what this feels like, with that lower budget feel to it. But it's not like a, I talked about the fear footage movies recently, and I really love and respect those and their director and creator, Ricky Umberger, who just did everything for those movies. It's not like that. Those are found footage. What those did for the found footage genre, for low-budget filmmakers, the kind of things that it showed them they can pull off with the right creative mind behind it and pretty much no budget behind it. This one has a slight more budget, but can show how a really good idea for slashers can do something and create something. For anybody who has the mind to do it and the will to do it, you can make something really cool. I really think so. I like the look of the movie. It's very much a fall-time movie. The directing is not like the best thing ever. There are certain shots that I'm almost convinced somebody else did. But still, I like all that. I like the cemetery look. It's very much a movie for this time of the year. The fall, October, the fall-y trees, leaves laying all over the place, that kind of thing. I just think it's so good. It just fits into this horror fest called After Dark Horror Fest. Not many of the horror fest films I saw, like Autopsy, do I remember liking to begin with, but this and Dark Ride, and now Lake Mungo, seeing that a couple of years ago, they all really stand out to me. I really want to hunt down all of these movies. Maybe not collect them. I might collect them, I don't know. But maybe just to watch them all over the channel here and maybe rank them all at some point. I don't know. I think there's like 3 or 4 horror fests, but I think the last one or two of them, the last one or two of them didn't have many movies. I think there was like 5 or 3 per the last couple. But I know the first 2 years of this horror fest thing had a lot of releases, which was kind of cool. Now, this film has pretty much a lot of practical effects. And when I say practical effects, typically it's more of like makeup. And when you see the movie, you'll understand why I bring that up. But there is quite a bit of CGI. But most of those practical effects and the makeup and stuff, I really love. I think the ghosts, or whatever, in this film, to me, really creep me out. And if you've seen this movie, you know why. If you've not seen this film, I could not recommend it enough to you. I don't spoil anything in my reviews, but I will tell you, you should see this to really see what makeup can do for a simple, really creepy concept and execution for it. If that makeup and that practical effects stuff had not been done with one particular ghost in an axe situation, it wouldn't have been as cool. It would not have been as cool. However, there is some CGI in here. Sometimes some CGI blood, I believe, but not much. There's a little bit of like CGI fire, and there's one particular thing at the finale that's like the big, ovation moment of the movie. The big ending of the movie that's a little bit too much CGI for me. You could have really solved that with just a lot of explosive fire and that kind of thing. I think there was enough budget here you could have done that instead of putting thousands into really rough-looking CGI even for 2006. It has not aged well for CGI. Once again, I always use this as my example. Think of 2003's Freddy vs. Jason worm. That's the kind of CGI level we're talking about when this is used towards the end of the movie. And the movie, just in general, has some goofier moments that, again, kind of bring it down. But a lot of that, again, I attribute more to the CGI, those goofier moments. Most of it, I think, is very serious, very well done, very well executed, well acted, all of that. Let's see, music. The music is very solid for me. I think it very much fits this movie. I wish we had, like, an actual theme song for this movie. I think that'd improve pretty much any movie, but especially for a lower-budget movie like this. It's not going to look like a big thing, like, it's not going to look fancy, like a Scream movie or a Halloween, early 2000s sequel. It's not going to look like that. But for what it has, it looks good. I think that music works for this movie, for the way it looks, but I wish we had an actual eerie theme song, like a piano song. A piano music type of thing would have fit this movie really, really well. A lot of the music can seem very fitting, but a lot of it can also seem kind of low budget-ish, like a royalty-free type of thing I try to talk about all the time. Other than that, I think it really suits. Overall, if you've not seen The Gravedancers, I think you're really missing out. It's such a fun movie, and I cannot believe I never hear people talk about this. I think Sinister Cinema Reviews, which is like my favorite horror movie reviewer out there, he's like the only person I've ever heard talk about this movie. I mean that, and it's a great flick. It's so underrated for a ghost movie. And again, it's perfect for this time of the year. I highly recommend it. I'm sure you could find this fairly cheap. I would be willing to bet on it. But I want to collect these After Dark horror film movies at some point, or at least watch them first, and then kind of judge. If the majority of them are really good, then I'll probably collect the entire thing, like I said. But for right now, The Gravedancers. Have you seen this movie? What do you think about it? Put your thoughts and comments down below. I would love to hear what you guys have to say about this one. Did you love it? Did you hate it? It's a really surprisingly good one in my opinion. For my personal rating, if I had to rate The Gravedancers, a movie that I've loved since I was a very young kid, on a 5-star basis, I would give it a 4 out of 5 stars. I think there are some people out there who might watch the prologue of this movie of a young woman getting attacked by an invisible spirit of some sort, and they might turn it off immediately, think it's too goofy. If that happens to be you, if you take my recommendation, you go to watch this, please stick with it. Stick with it for the first 15 minutes. Get the characters developed a little bit. They're not the best, but let them get there. Really get into the story and the concept of the haunting and the grave dancing stuff. I promise you, I think it'll really linger with you. I really do. And there's some of the stuff that's going to haunt me into my sleep tonight. I just know it. It's like if somebody had taken, and not a Slender Man way, but if somebody had taken a creepypasta and not like a Channel Zero way, and had done a really decent budget on a creepypasta story, this is what that feels like. It's great. I really like it a lot. It's flawed, but it's really good, and I still stand by it, and I always will. Anyway, it's one of my favorite parts of my entire collection of movies, especially when we talk about things I grew up on that really got me into horror. This is a big, big one for me. Anyway, 4 out of 5 stars. Put your thoughts and comments down below. Again, thank you guys for watching. God bless you all. I will be talking about Dark Ride at some point. I don't think I'm going to watch Dark Ride tonight, but I will talk about it at some point because I love that movie too. It's one of my favorite slashers of all time, as I said. Anyway, thank you guys. God bless you all. Goodbye.